Alright, so I'm going to pick up at number 11, which is where I left off in the previous video. This one says to solve using the quadratic formula. So first we need to recall that that's negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So this is in standard form and my equation is set equal to 0. So I'm going to identify a, which is the coefficient of n squared, so that's 2. B is the coefficient of my n, so that's 5. And C is my constant here, so negative 25. Okay. So I always write it with parentheses, so I have negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. And now I'm going to substitute in my values. So I have negative b, so b is going to go here, plus or minus b squared minus 4ac, all divided by 2a. Alright, so if I simplify this, I have a negative times 5, which is a negative 5, plus or minus 5 squared is 25. This negative times this negative is going to give me a positive. And I have 8 times 25, which is 200, all over 4. Let's see, I get negative 5 plus or minus the square root of 225, all over 4. If I break down 225, I know that 5 goes into it. So I have the square root of 225 is 5 and 45. Let's see, that's 5 and 9. So I can take out a 3 and I can take out a 5, and what's left inside? Nothing, right? So that means the square root of 225 is 15. So if you didn't know that, now we broke it down and we got 15. So now I just need to simplify these. I've got negative 5 plus 5. So negative 5 plus 15 over 4. And I have negative 5 minus 15 over 4. So let's see what my two answers are. 10 over 4 is 5 over 2. And negative 20 over 4 is negative 5. Alright, so 12 is also to use the quadratic formula. So the first thing I'm going to do is identify my A, my B, and my C. And I'm going to plug that into the formula. So negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So let's see, b goes here, a goes here, and c goes here. So simplifying this, I have negative 1 plus or minus the square root of 1 minus 4 times 3 is 12 times 2 is 24 all over 6. So negative 1 plus or minus the square root of negative 23. Anytime we see a negative in a radical, we should know we need to take out an I. So I'm going to have negative 1 plus or minus I radical 23 over 6. And since I can't simplify the square root of 23, that is my final answer. Alright, for question number 13, it says to solve the systems of equation. It doesn't say how. I typically always do elimination. So I see that I have 16x here. So what do I have to multiply the second equation by to get the opposite of 16? 2. Good. So I'm going to have the first equation, which I did nothing to, so I just write it exactly how it is. Then I have the second equation, which is negative 16x. I'm distributing that 2. I get negative 10y, and I get, what's 19 times 2? 38? Good. So my x's eliminate and my y's eliminate, and I get 0 on this side. And then what's 38 minus 29? 9. Does 0 ever equal 9? No. So what's my answer? Good. No solution. All right, question number 14 also says to solve the system. So I'm going to label these equation 1, equation 2, and equation 3. So if I look at equation 2, I don't have a b term. So I'm going to use equation 1 and equation 3 and try to eliminate the b term in those. So I'm going to multiply equation 3 by a -1. So equation 1 stayed the same. I have 3a plus b plus 5c equals -4. And when I multiply equation 3 by a negative, I'm going to get 6a minus b minus c equals +4. So my b's eliminate, which is what I wanted. And I have 9a plus 4c equals 0. So this new equation 4, I'm going to use equation 4 and equation 2. Equation 4 is 9a plus 4c equals 0. And equation 2 right here is -3a minus 2c equals 0. So I'm going to eliminate a, because I can easily see that if I have a 9a, I can multiply equation 2 by a 3. And that's going to give me opposite coefficients. So I have 9a plus 4c equals 0. And when I distribute this, I have -9a minus 6c equals 0. So a's eliminate. -2c equals 0. If I divide by -2, I get c equals 0. Alright, so we found c to be 0. And I'm going to go ahead and plug that back in. I'm going to plug it in up here to equation 2. So equation 2, I have -3a minus 2 times c equals 0. So I have -3a, that's 0, equals 0. If I divide by a -3, I get a equals 0. So now if I have a's value and c's value, I can plug it into either of these, the first one or the second one. So I'm going to plug it into the first. It's going to be 3a plus b times 5c equals -4. And the values we had were 0 and 0, so that's 0. So b equals -4. And the way we write this is always alphabetical order, so I have 0 for a, -4 for b, and 0 for c. Alright, number 15 says to simplify, and I have an addition in between, so I know I'm going to add these. I'm going to go ahead and look for like terms. So I have a -4r cubed and an r cubed. I always start with my highest degree first. So that's going to give me a -3r cubed. And then I'm looking for my r squareds. So here's my r squared and here's my r squared. -8r squared. Then I would have my r's, so here's a -8r and there's no other term to combine that with. And then last but not least, don't forget this 3 out here, so I have a +3. Okay, so number 16, the operation in between, there's no addition, there's no subtraction. Instead, right here, there's multiplication when you have a parentheses next to a parentheses. So we're going to go ahead and distribute this. I'm going to get 24x cubed 8 times 7 is 56, and I get x squared. 8x times negative 8 is a negative 64x. And now I need to distribute my 6 here. So I'm going to get an 18x squared, a 42x, and a negative 48. So now I need to combine like terms. I always start with my highest degree, and I see that I have an x cubed term. There's no other x cubed to combine with, so I get a 24x cubed. Now I'm going to combine my x squared, so I have 56x squared and 18x squared, so I get 74x squared. Next I have my x's. I have a negative 64 and a positive 42, so if I subtract those I get a negative 22x. And last but not least, I have a constant of 48. So there's my answer. Now going down to number 17, it says to divide. It doesn't say if I have to use long division or synthetic division, so I'm going to choose to do synthetic division. And I know my setup is the coefficients, so I have 1 to my b cubed, negative 18 for my b squared, 71, and 82. Then I have b minus 9, and I set that equal to 0. Add 9 to both sides. So that tells me that 9 is what's going to go on the outside here. I'm going to bring down the 1, or drop it like it's hot. 9 times 1, I'm going to multiply. I multiply those. And now I'm going to add these. So a negative 18 and a 9 give me a negative 9. If I multiply 9 with negative 9, I get negative 81. If I add those, I get negative 10. Continue, and I multiply, and I get negative 90. So my remainder is going to be a negative 8. So the way I write this is I took b cubed, and I divided it by b. So my answer is going to have b squared. Then I decrease my exponents by 1 each time, and I get b squared minus 9b minus 10, and my remainder goes over what I divided by. Alright, number 18 says to factor completely, so the first thing I'm going to do is look for a common factor. I don't think that there's anything that goes into 9 and 64. 2 goes into 64 but doesn't go into 9. 3 goes into 9 but not into 64. So I'm going to go straight to factoring my trinomial. And what multiplies to 9 is 3n and 3n. And what multiplies to 64 is 8 and 8. If I multiply these, I get 24n and 24n. So I'm going to go ahead and check if 24 and 24 will give me 64, because remember those have to add or subtract to give me my middle term, and they won't. So using 3n and 8, 3n and 8 is not going to work. So let's go ahead and try something else. Let's see. What multiplies to 9n squared? Let's try 9n and n. What multiplies to 64? Let's try 8 and 8. If I multiply these, I get 8n. If I multiply these, I get 72. And if I add or subtract these, I need to get 64. So in fact, if I have 72n and I subtract the 8n, I will get positive 64. So that means my sign here has to be negative and my sign here has to be positive. Now remember, I always say to check your signs. So will a negative 8 times a positive 8 still give me my negative 64? And it will. So my factored form is negative 9n minus 8 times n plus 8.